مردم شریف ایران، من شهریار افشار هستم، میزبان شما در Politics 365. امروز خانم مریسا خورما به برنامه ما دعوت شده از واشنگتن دی سی. ایشون یه پروگرام دایرکتور هستش در ویلسون سنتر و ادجانکت پروفسور at جورجتاون یونیورسیتی با بک‌گراند و اسپشیالتی در روابط خاورمیانه. تازگی‌ها یکی دو هفته پیش یک گرد همایی کشورهای عرب در خاورمیانه اجرا شده بود که ایشون در اون شرکت کرده بود و میخواستن به اصطلاح برداشتی که ایشون کردن از اون برنامه به توجه شما برسونیم. بقیه برنامه به انگلیسی خواهد بود. Marissa, welcome. Thanks so much for making time. Such a turbulent and unpredictable time in the Middle East. Everyone I talk to in Washington across the world is just overwhelmed with so much going on. You know, Raisi's death and what's happening in Gaza, and now specifically what we want to talk about, the recent Arab summit, and really what the Arab countries are planning and what they feel they accomplished in that summit. So we really want to hear from your perspective more about the who participated, what they hope to achieve, and talk a little bit about that before we go on. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. As you said, the members of the Arab League met last week in Manama, Bahrain. So Bahrain was the chair and the host of this 33rd meeting of the Arab League. This was a very important gathering, not only because it's the first one that brings all the members of the Arab League together since October 7th and Israel's war in Gaza, but because the outcome, which is referred to as the Bahrain Declaration, I think is very significant. The Arab countries have come together to not only discuss the need to end the war, for a ceasefire and the return of the hostages, but they re-emphasized the need to work on a concrete plan towards the two-state solution and reaffirmed their support for the end of Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories and the creation of a Palestinian state that lives side by side to Israel. Of course, this is a very contentious point for Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, but the Bahrain Declaration was very cognizant of where Israeli society is. I think the main audience in Israel were perhaps folks who are more centrist and more likely to make peace the day after. So the first thing that they call for in this declaration is a UN peacekeeping force that they will back in the short term, of course, to govern Gaza, that would give time for the I guess, rebuilding of a Palestinian government that could take over. I think there's an understanding on the Arab side and in very small circles in Israel as well, that the only way to ensure that Hamas doesn't return is to have a credible and functioning government, Palestinian government in Gaza. We've heard Bibi Netanyahu, who keeps saying that he's constrained by the right-wing factions in his government, that this will be a gift to terrorism if you allow the PA to move back. But the Arab countries in the summit were very careful to outline what this looks like. So they did not say that the PA will step in right away. The PA does not have the capacity to do so. Palestinian security forces do not have the capacity to do so. That's why they're calling for an Arab-backed UN peacekeeping force. And they're also very pragmatic in their approach. They recognize that the government, the Palestinian government, has to be rebuilt, and so they declared accordingly. The second point to keep in mind is that it recognized that the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, is the sole representative of the Palestinian people. And so this is a move away from the Palestinian Authority. It's their way of saying, we understand that the Palestinian Authority is defunct and it's not able to govern and it's not able to take over. But this is also, when we talk about the PLO, we're essentially talking about Fatah, the political party that essentially led negotiations with Israel during the Oslo process. And this is how you cut out Hamas as well. And third, and then I'll stop there, they called for an international peace and development summit to also be hosted in Bahrain in the next few months to talk about two things: concrete steps on the political side to get us to the two-state solution with a timeline. And this is very important because in the last 30 years, and Oslo is now 30 years old, we've been talking about a peace process with no peace. And so it's essential that you have a timeline and concrete steps to get you to the two-state solution. And the second component, that they were very emphatic in the importance of providing basically human development assistance initiatives that focus on health, that focus on education, that focus on employment for all those who are affected by conflict. And so those are very essential steps. This did not receive a lot of attention in the US media and barely any attention in the Israeli media. But it is important that they got to this point. And the hope is that more conversations will take place in the diplomatic sphere to get us a little bit closer to ending the conflict and envisioning a future for the Palestinians and Israelis living side by side together in peace and security.
Well, that is a major threshold, momentous moment, all those countries coming together and developing some kind of a roadmap. Cynical question, and please pardon my cynicism, how do you cut out people that negotiate with guns from a diplomatic process? I mean, how does that work when we say, whatever Netanyahu hopes to achieve by bombing Gaza and all the collateral damage that he's causing, and his single-minded approach to eliminate Hamas, and now here we are, a very good diplomatic solution made up of all the Arab countries around the region. I mean, it just seems like Hamas is a spoiler. No matter, even if you get rid of the leadership, the ideology is going to be there. Like, how do you do that?
That's a very good question, and it's a very fair question to ask at this point because, across the Arab world, you see a lot of support for the idea of Hamas or what Hamas stands for. And right now, in the psyche of Arab public opinion, it stands for armed resistance equals the only way you get rid of Israel's occupation. And Israel's illegal means. And we've seen that in not only in the war in Gaza, but also in its illegal settlement expansion, in the way that that the government and security forces have pretty much turned a blind eye to extremist settler violence against the Palestinians. And we're not talking about, a conflict that started yesterday as well. There's context that has to be understood. Hamas and other groups such as Palestinian Islamic Jihad and some of the other splinter groups that maintain, this whole notion of, violence as the only way forward, absolutely are spoilers. And that's why you have to prioritize the political process, and you have to empower those who reject violence as a means forward. And that's on both sides, both in Israel and in the Palestinian territories. This is essential because you do have right-wing elements who have been talking in the Israeli cabinet, who have been talking about re-annexing Gaza, rebuilding settlements in Gaza, as well as the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. We're not making this up. They are there on the record talking about it. And so the only way you cut off Hamas, particularly in Gaza, from the government structure is by building an alternative Palestinian government. That's not going to happen overnight. And as you said, there's so much destruction in Gaza that there's so much cynicism about how you move forward. But the timeline and setting a roadmap for that is essential. It is going to take decades. I mean, the United Nations, as well as the World Bank, issued reports assessing the economic damage of the war on Gaza's economy. And I think the estimate of the United Nations was something like 30 to 40 years of rebuilding if if the economy was growing at 10%, which is unheard of course. And so we're looking at 50, 60, maybe 70 years of rebuilding to where Gaza was before. There are plans that many people have come together to discuss for the day after about security, about prosperity and economy in Gaza. But of course, without leadership and the political will on both sides, and if I may add, the role of the United States in leading this effort, it's going to be very difficult, and we will continue to see cycles of violence that will spread beyond Gaza.
Right. Wow, that's heavy. 50 to 60 years. I don't think most ordinary citizens, whether you live in the Middle East or America or Europe, can see that far ahead. And to project, not only forget the economic growth, but to project any kind of political or diplomatic unity for that far along in a region that has such entrenched generational trauma, on both sides, Israelis, Palestinians, neighboring countries, and of course all the Iran-backed, elements, Hezbollah and Hamas and others, to be able to sustain it. Now we're talking about every 4 years a new American president, and as you know, we like to oppose each other. So every time somebody gets elected, their foreign policy has to be the opposite of the other guy. And that causes a great deal of uncertainty in that the sustainability of a truce, or hopefully some kind of a process. But I get it. I understand why. I guess I'm also curious, I know Iran wasn't a part of that Arab summit, but how do you feel they will spoil or try to spoil that very fragile diplomatic process that is now hopefully taking root?
I mean, the vast majority of the countries in the region, and we can put Syria and some elements of political parties in Iraq aside, but the key countries in the GCC, as well as Jordan and Egypt, have absolutely no love lost for Iran. They see Iran as a spoiler. They understand very well how this regime in Iran has in the past and continues to use the Palestinian cause for its own popularity in the region. They've built the so-called axis of resistance, of course, on various issues, but they coalesce around this. And they see the points of vulnerability, they see vacuums, and they exploit these vacuums. I think it was important that the Arab countries come together and unify and revive the main tenets of the Arab Peace Initiative that was agreed to at the Beirut Summit in 2002, that promised full normalization of relations with Israel, with the 22 Arab members of the League, basically once the occupation ends and the Palestinian state is created. Iran is not part of that. And the only way you cut off its fangs in that Arab-Israeli arena is by ensuring that this process succeeds. I think that this has been talked about ad nauseum by many Arab leaders, and over the decades. But we've seen U.S. engagement being hot and cold, hot and cold, hot and cold in this arena, and the vacuums that it's created were very conveniently filled by Iran. So that's why U.S. engagement is critical, not only in this political process to bring Palestinians and Israelis together, but for the region as a whole. And it's not just about military presence. Military presence is important for establishing deterrence from the American military perspective, but you have to have political engagement. But like you said, it's going to be very, very challenging given the domestic political components at home.
Right, and apart from the unreliability of the American political system and its support of a peace process as elections come and go, the Islamic Republic's entire identity is built on demonizing external enemies like the great Satan and Israel and standing up for the Palestinian cause. So to lose an enemy, as someone wrote, I think in a book, to lose an enemy is a moment that Iran has been trying to defer for the Islamic Republic has been trying to defer for its entire existence. They want to keep an enemy in order to justify their existence. So it's going to be a tough hill, and that's why I think, and I would love your opinion on this. How do you feel, given this particular diplomatic initiative, Iran's initiative to try to restore ties with Saudi Arabia is going to affect some of this? Because those two biggest kids on the block trying to build roads will surely have some kind of impact on this peace process.
I think that for very close Iran and sort of Arab politics watchers, this new so-called rapprochement was completely overstated in the way that it was covered in the media. It was important to have some sort of dialogue with Iran, primarily with regards to Yemen, and it very much focused on that essentially. But the folks that I've spoken to who have had various interactions with, for example, Saudi diplomats who are in Iran, they all agree that it was important to maybe open that diplomatic channel. But again, both countries remain quite, on opposite sides, basically. The Saudis are talking to this administration about some sort of normalization deal with Israel. Of course, that would include elements of a Palestinian state, and what was agreed to in Bahrain is part of that deal. And, Iran will never go there. So they don't sit in the same, in the same arena, on the same sides, right? So they established some contact. I think it's always important to maintain contact. I mean, the UAE maintains also channels of communication. Other countries in the region, including Jordan and Egypt as well, Jordan has diplomatic presence there. That doesn't mean that they are all aligned. They are not at all aligned.
Right, and maybe just a photo op. And then lastly, in the 1 minute or so we have left, the recent news that, what was it, Norway and Spain and I forget another country
Ireland
want to, they want to recognize Palestine. I mean, that's an unprecedented, and then France's initiative, and that's an unprecedented break with the U.S. a U.S. ally. And of course, the International Criminal Court, issuance of arrest warrants for Hamas leaders and Israeli leaders, unprecedented. The U.S. is not preparing to respond appropriately, whatever that means. These are unprecedented times. I've never seen this break in. Is it kind of does this mean the U.S. and maybe by extension its ally Israel have lost some international legitimacy after this particular event in Gaza?
I think, first of all, Israel has absolutely lost a lot of international support. They have been pressured. People are seeing live what is happening in Gaza. And if there was, initial sympathy, as there should have been, for the absolute horrific attacks of October 7th, I think a lot of that has moved away towards the Palestinians, given just the sheer images of death and destruction. If we're just looking at the demographics, we are not seeing Hamas fighters being killed. We're seeing children, women, and elderly people being killed. Some of them, some footage from various outlets of people being shot in the head. It's not just the bombs. 60% of homes in Gaza have been destroyed. So yes, Israel is losing a lot of international support. The United States is also losing a lot of international support, particularly amongst its key allies in the region, because it is seen as completely complicit. It is providing military assistance to Israel. People have seen a shift in, the Biden administration statements with regards to what's going on. Perhaps adding pressure on Israel when Israel basically cut off the Palestinians from food and water. But they haven't seen a shift in policy. The policy remains that the United States will continue to support Israel in defending itself against terrorism, and the statements may have shifted over time, but are by nowhere near where some of the people in the region want to see it.
Right. Well, Merissa Khurma, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a very enlightening conversation, very important conversation to the world to keep understanding what's happening in the Middle East. I hope you'll come back to join us soon because we've learned a lot from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.